Last on Everdark. Realizing that the Order knows of Daemon's awakening, it becomes clear that House Ravenscroft will be in danger. Daemon offered the house the gift of oneness, granting each vampire the strength of their combined spirit rather than simply their individual strength to draw upon. But the most shocking revelation of all is that Daemon recognizes that Balthazar is the immortal Eiros reborn. Everdark, Episode 27, From Blue to Red. Caemorn grinned as he rode deeper into Solace's woods on his steed, Naboa. Naboa was the color of mist and ran as fast as the rainstorms that sometimes lashed the Order's city. The twin werewolf brothers Tarn and Farun, whom he had sealed in their werewolf forms, flanked him, their tongues lolled out to taste the air. They were on a hunt. Caemorn adjusted his grip on the long spear known as Borage. The spear glowed with a soft blue-white light, and that glow would increase the closer it was to the wielder's chosen prey. He'd found it in the armory in the spire. There were many powerful magical weapons there that Seer's people had, for some unknown reason, not used in their fight against the Order so long ago. The weapons were powerful, but also dangerous to the user. Many vampires had died trying to wield them, but there were a few weapons, like Barrage, that could be used without any fear. Yet he was certain that Seer and her people would have known the ways the others could have been used safely. He saw Barrage glowing hotter in his hand, and he knew that his prey was near. He had been tracking a creature known as a night hag for the past 2 hours. The creature looked like an elderly woman, swathed in ancient tattered robes, but she could spring great distances and ran like the wind. Her fingertips were blackened, poisonous claws. The long, yellowed toenails of her feet could disembowel a man in 3 seconds flat. The hag's favorite prey were the humans that were brought into Solace as the Order's food source. Young girls were a seeming delicacy for the desiccated creatures. Many loathed leaving the Everdark for Earth any longer. Caemorn was among those, preferring the peace and eternal darkness of Solace to the smelly, dirty, noisy world of the humans. So their food was brought to them. Normally the beings that lived in the Everdark stayed away from the city, but not the hags. They were attracted to life. They drank the blood of their victims like the vampires did, but they didn't stop there. They drained their victims dry and then would feast on the flesh and organs. They would break their victims' bones open and suck out the marrow. A human in their grasp would be plucked clean in an hour. And no matter how much they ate, they were always hungry. The one he was tracking had managed to filch a young woman who had been walking in the gardens that surrounded the base of the spire. Tarn had found what remained of her, just a long, slender arm the color of alabaster, and brought it to him. He had recognized the scent of decay that the hags always left behind. He dipped the tip of Barrage into one of the gnawed portions of the arm to give it a taste of the hag, and then they'd gone on the hunt. Caemorn loved to wander far into the seemingly endless woods that surrounded Solace. Because no sun ever shone here, there was no clock in the back of his mind telling him he must find shelter. He could just go on, sleeping whenever he wished, often in the boughs of the huge trees. Despite living in Solace for over 10,000 years, the whole world had not been seen. In fact, only a small portion of it had been. The truth was it was too dangerous. Once out of the view of the city, the Everdark was wild, utterly untamed. Creatures far more fearsome than the night hags moved under the thick canopy of trees, or swam in the seemingly endless black and silver oceans, or hid beneath the sands of deserts so vast that they could have swallowed the Sahara whole. Many vampire explorers had set out to see if they could reach the other vampire cities in the Everdark, to prove or disprove the hypothesis that each city was its own pocket universe that didn't touch another. But none of them ever saw the entirety of the planet. Most never came back, and those that did, those that had gone far, when they returned were different. They spoke only in whispers of what they'd seen, whispered words that made no sense. When Caemorn had hired a powerful Iros vampire to search the mind of one of those explorers, both vampires had gone mad and had to be put down. Such a thing was never attempted again. Even trying to interrogate the soul of this explorer had led many a Kali vampire to retreat to her tower room and never come out. Most of these explorer vampires would just leave the confines of the city and disappear into the woods, never to be seen or heard of again. Whether they went back to whatever terrible wonder they had found out there that had taken their minds, or whether they simply experienced their second deaths, no one knew. But while these stories frightened most vampires into staying close to the cities, or even retreating to Earth, for Caemorn the unknown vastness called to him. He sometimes thought he should have been one of those explorers. He would not have been taken by whatever the others had found that had driven them mad. A Kali vampire must look into the mouth of madness, the eyes of death, and not look away. They must survive such an encounter not once, but countless times. Only those strong enough to do this survived. But his master, Artemis Lucius, had determined from the moment he was made that he was for the Order. He would be the one Kali to become so trusted and revered that he would bring all their bloodline up in esteem. And he had done it. But the esteem that his master craved didn't exactly become theirs. No matter what the Kali vampires did, they were distrusted because they dabbled in death, and vampires feared death far more than mortals did. So the Kalis were considered tainted in some way. Even now, Caemorn knew that there were many out there who would have preferred a new preceptor. In fact, would have preferred the exiled Arceus Cain. His grin turned to a grimace. He would never give up his role as preceptor. They would have to take it from him, and few were powerful enough to even try. But that also meant he could not give in to the call of the vastness, could not become the great explorer of vampire kind. No, he would remain chained to Solace's spire. Caemorn adjusted in the fine tooled saddle. His crimson and black silk cloak billowed out behind him like a pair of wings as Naboa cantered through the woods. His armor, black as well with red etchings of skulls and vines on the front and back, sat comfortably on his muscular frame. This armor, too, was found in the armory. When not worn, it was a 5-inch by 5-inch metallic disc. If one slapped the disc against one's chest, the armor grew from it and completely engulfed the vampire's form, no matter what the vampire's dimensions. The armor was impervious to gunfire and blades. Only other magical weapons appeared capable of harming it, at least so far as they knew. Again, it seemed strange to him that neither Seer nor her people had used such amazing pieces to defend themselves.
Perhaps they could foresee it was pointless, that no matter what they did, they would lose. So why bother trying?
He could not imagine simply giving up. He would fight to the last breath of his second life. But if one could see their own death, over and over again, would one still be able to fight? Or would it be as if one had already died? Death, for a Kali, both held no fear and was terrifying at the same time. They knew what the spirit could be used for. He used the power of souls to fuel his magic, to do his will. There was nothing more terrifying than the thought of a Kali's own soul used in such a manner. He knew that there would be an eternity of pain and torment ahead of him if that was the case. So that was where the fear lay. But the Kali knew that the soul did go on, and some actually glimpsed the next world. So that was why they did not fear their second deaths. Maybe the Seer vampires saw that place too. He had never asked Seer this. In truth, he loathed being in her presence. He always had this feeling that she was mocking him, though she had never been anything but respectful. He feared that she simply reflected back his own uncertainties about himself. Just as he wore this armor, he wore his master's desires for him just the same. Only Artemis, outside of Fiona, knew about Nightvarlen being discovered. That was part of the reason he was out of the spire and hunting. "You've sent Confessor Darksilver to investigate. Are you sure that's wise?" Artemis had asked him through the glass. Every city had at least one glass. Many had far more. They were the Skypes of Everdark, allowing one to speak and see another person between the cities. They looked like mirrors, except they did not reflect anything, but instead showed boiling clouds of grey smoke until it connected to another glass.
Fiona has a brilliant tactical mind and she keeps secrets well.
Caemorn had tried to resist his voice from tightening at the criticism. Even though he was over 1,400 years old and preceptor, Artemis still treated him as if he were the newest of fledglings. Perhaps, compared to the 5,000-year-old Cali vampire, he was.
If you're curious about how the ongoing stories work on my serial site, wraithrain.com, here it is. I am always writing 3 or 4 stories at the same time. I write between 12 and 15 chapters worth of updates to these stories every single month. That's at least 40,000 words, and oftentimes it's more. The moment a chapter is done, I post it for my members to read and react to with comments. How do member comments affect my writing? A ton. I look over the comments for the latest chapter before starting to write the next one. It gives me a good jumping off point. They tell me what's working, what's confusing, and what members want more of.
Artemis looked nothing like his age. He had been turned at nearly the first bloom of youth, at only 15. He had curly blonde hair that fell across a pale, unlined brow, and large silver eyes that seemed to fill his heart-shaped face. He was fine-boned and slender like a reed. He often wore a simple white tunic with a gold belt and a wreath of green leaves atop his head, rather like a young Cupid. That was the outfit he had on now as he lounged on a sofa of fine blue silk. Everything about Artemis gave the impression of softness and innocence, but he was neither soft nor innocent. Though turned before he reached full manhood, Artemis had founded his own house only a few hundred years into his life. In the Cully bloodline, there were only 24 houses, as few fledglings survived the brutal training. It was unheard of for such a young vampire to do as Artemis had. But Artemis had defied all the odds and carved a place for himself in the Cully Empire. He ruled the city of Lasting, though there were many older vampires that wanted that spot. But Artemis kept them at bay with seeming ease. Fiona Darksilver is still devastated at the loss of her mentor, Arceus Kane, Artemis said testily. He pointed at Caemorn's chest. You know this. That's why you sent her to spy on House Ravenscroft.
You make it sound as if I intended to test her and not discover what he and Balthazar know.
He answered coolly. Didn't you? Artemis tugged on a blonde curl. I understand that Arceus is your particular bugbear, Caemorn. He is everything you are not, including beloved of the people. Caemorn dug his fingernails into his palms, but did not allow the sharp pain he felt to be reflected on his face.
I sent her because she is intelligent and knows Arceus well. Whatever affection she has towards him, he surely has more towards her. He will reveal to her—
I highly doubt he will reveal anything. Those large silver eyes pinned him in place. Arceus may appear to be a friendly bear, but he is still a bear. He will eat you if you get too close. I do not know why people automatically associate friendliness with safety. Those who we perceive as friendly get to approach while others do not. Easier to strike from a closer position. Caemorn felt filleted under his master's dissection of his actions, but he continued to remain calm as he explained,
No vessel is perfect. Fiona is loyal to the Order. She is very pious. I balanced that against her relationship with Arceus. It was the best choice.
Artemis regarded him silently, one hand twirling a lock of that pure gold hair. Yes, I can see that you attempted to act for the best, but this whole situation feels like we are riding a knife's edge, Caemorn. Fail, and you do more than simply disappoint me. Not that disappointing Artemis wasn't extremely dangerous in and of itself, but that remains.
I realize that,
Caemorn answered, but found that his mouth kept moving.
Perhaps it was unwise for you to insist that I kill the Harrows.
Artemis went very still and looked more like one of those Greek statues he seemed to pattern himself after. Oh? Caemorn licked dry lips, but now that he had said it, he might as well go on with it.
Without his parents' deaths, Julian Harrow would never have become hellbent on discovering our existence.
And you think the Harrows themselves would have let go of this rabbit after they had found Nightvarlen? Artemis's tone was almost curious, as if he were considering what Caemorn was saying.
We could have made them forget, with the assistance of an Iros.
There is only one Iros vampire that could have ensured the people of the Harrows' mental strength never remembered, and did not go mad or simple from the process. And as I recall, you were not willing to ask for his help, Artemis reminded him, the curious tone becoming cutting in an instant.
Balthazar. It always comes back to him and his blasted exiled house. He would have demanded readmittance to the Everdark. We could not do that, and to have him know about Nightvarlen's existence...
But I am betting he does know about it now. If the rumors are to be believed, Julian is Daemon's fledgling and Christian is his. Artemis shook his head and his golden curls bounced becomingly. He almost looked cute. Caemorn wished he could rip those locks off.
We'll know more when Fiona reports in,
he answered neutrally. He refused to believe anything until he heard it directly from her. I expect to hear from you as soon as that happens, Artemis said sternly.
Of course.
The glass had gone dark as the connection was cut. Caemorn's shoulders slumped as the tension drained out of him. Artemis was not faithful. He had never believed in the godliness of any of the immortals. He had never believed that Daemon had saved the vampires from the immortals' deprivations during the war. In fact, he believed that everything they thought about the immortals was false. After all, if they were so powerful, how could they keep Seer locked up for so long? He had repeatedly pointed out to Caemorn that Daemon's alleged special power, Armageddon, was simply made up. The word Armageddon is a Hebrew word associated with the second coming of Christ. Daemon was long asleep when the humans, Jesus, allegedly walked the earth, Artemis had said with a dismissive wave of his hand.
Perhaps the name is simply new, but the power is old,
Caemorn had suggested. But Artemis had dismissed that possibility. Even if what you are saying is true, then the vampires who would have seen it would not have likely been old enough to have seen Daemon use it. There are none of our kind still existing from that age, none that aren't mad as hatters. Yet Caemorn knew that most vampires wouldn't take that critical view of Daemon that Artemis had. Most were young and impressionable. They had been filled from the beginning of their second lives with the stories of Daemon saving them. The Order had made sure of that. Yet an actual Daemon, one that wasn't controlled by the Order itself, could destroy everything they had built. And who knew what he would be like? Those who had lived through the war said nothing good about the immortals, and Daemon had led them before he went to sleep. Seer was frightening herself, and strange beyond strange. Yet if the populace knew that Daemon was alive, awake, and ready to return, unless the Order stopped him before that happened, they would have to welcome him back, even if that meant destruction in the long run. Caemorn had begun to pace as he thought of all the terrible possibilities that could await them all in the future, where the vampire king roamed the worlds. If only he knew if that king now moved. In some ways, things were far better on Earth, at least in terms of communication. He would have been able to call Fiona and hear from her immediately, but instead he would have to wait for her to return. So he was grateful when Tarn had brought him the arm. A hunt would clear his mind. It would give him something physical to do instead of simply waiting for news. He had ignored the slight tingle at the back of his mind as he had looked down at that perfect arm. The fact that it was perfect, other than the gnawing on the end, bothered him. Normally, the night hag's draining of the blood would shrivel the flesh. Further, after eating the internal organs, the hags normally feasted on the limbs first, yet the hand and forearm were quite unmarked. The pointer finger had been crooked, as if to lure him in a certain direction. But he had been so anxious to move, he had ignored that faint warning feeling. He had Borage, Tarn, and Farun, as well as his own powers. Few could challenge him alone, and certainly not when he had his beasts and magic weapon with him. He tightened his hold on Borage and retracted his helmet. The hag was heading towards a swampy, cleared area. He had been there before. He believed that the swamps were the hag's natural habitats. Retreating to her lair there made sense, but something felt off. He took in a deep breath. The clean air of the forest, scented with pine and snow, had changed to the richer, loamier scent of the swamp. The faint traces of sulfur and rot drifted over to him as well. His nose wrinkled. The swamp, though it could be alluring with the many drifting balls of blue fire that rose from the bubbling surface, wasn't his favorite place. Farun drew in a breath too and sneezed. The werewolf rubbed his nose in disgust. He didn't like the scent either. Caemorn slowed Naboa to a walk as they approached the thinning tree line that marked the beginning of the swamp. He could already see the glowing orbs of blue fire rising from the swamp's murky surface, and right at the edge of those black waters stood a single night hag. It was the one that he had been trailing. She nibbled on the woman's other hand. Tarn let out a curious grunt, and Caemorn glanced down at him. The furry face showed confusion. The hag should be running, but she stood there as if waiting for them. Convinced this was a trap, but feeling the undeniable urge to continue on, Caemorn slid off of Noboa's back and urged the horse to stay where she was. He and the werewolves strode towards the hag. The wet earth sucked at his boots, wanting to pull him down into its sticky embrace. The werewolf's fur up to their ankles was soon heavy with the stinking black mud. Caemorn's mood dampened with every sucking step. Finally, he stood a few feet from her. Borage glowed almost blindingly.
"You seek death?"
he asked her. The hags could speak English, amazingly enough. They had likely heard the vampires speaking it and seemed to have a rudimentary understanding of the language. The fact that they might be intelligent, though, did not stop him from killing them with ease. The hag took another bite from the woman's arm in response, chewing almost thoughtfully. Caemorn gritted his teeth. His fangs extended with his anger. The bitch had made him walk through mud. The werewolves would have to be thoroughly bathed, and they hated the water. She'd taken one of his humans. He was not amused. Did she dare defy him as everyone else seemed to be doing lately?
"You shall have it, then,"
he said, and thrust Borage into her chest. She let out a guttural sound and finally dropped the hand she was still nibbling on. But then she grasped hold of Borage and pulled herself up its length until she was nearly face to face with him. Her eyes, which had been pitch black, suddenly started to glow red. He flinched back before forcing himself to draw nearer. She croaked out, her breath foul with rot, the following words.
"The king! The king! The king has returned!"
Unnerved, more than afraid, Caemorn hissed.
"Well, he won't be saving you."
With a yell of rage, Caemorn tore off the hag's head. His yell echoed throughout the swamp, and the whir of the night insects went silent at it. The blue orbs of fire did not even rise from the swamp's depths for a long moment. Farun, who had been sniffing the hag's corpse, considering eating it, suddenly stilled. His shaggy head jerked up, as did his brothers. They were staring out into the swamp that was suddenly lit up by the orbs once more, except they were not blue anymore. They were red. Join us next time for episode 28, Denial.
Writing is often hard, lonely work, but not when you're writing serial stories on a site like wraithrain.com. The reason is it's a lot of fun because the readers don't have to wait to read my latest and greatest chapter, and I don't have to wait to know what my readers are thinking. Only a fraction of the members comment, but that's okay. If you do join Wraith Rain as a member, I'd love for you to drop a comment on the latest chapter just to introduce yourself so I can get the chance to know who you are.
The Everdark Podcast by X Aratare. is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.